It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who's traveled all the way from London to join us here today. Dr. Rowe is a speech-language pathologist and holds a number of leadership roles in the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. He is widely respected for his work innovating better ways to provide patient care. And in 2022, he was recognized by the Queen for his many contributions to the fields of head and neck oncology and speech-language therapy. And my favorite pictures are you and your mom at the Jubilee. On a personal note, Justin is just absolutely delightful. The SLP team had the opportunity to spend the afternoon with him, learning from him about ways that we can partner with all of you to improve what we do at Stanford. And so he's going to share with us today some of his experience and expertise in bringing patients and caregivers together to build a better future.
So thank you, Heather, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's a real pleasure to be amongst you and also to hear your stories. It's a great privilege. I'm a speech and language pathologist. I work at the Royal Marsden Hospital, which is a cancer hospital in London, and I also work at Imperial College Healthcare within the airway service there. And as I say, it's a great honour to be here, and I hope that following on from Dr. Ramachandran's presentation just now, some of that, hearing your experiences, will be really relevant going forward. And I hope that I can give you some pointers and ideas about how you can shape those experiences to work together to improve care pathways. So just disclosures, I receive speaker fees from the Point of Care Foundation, where I teach on their experience-based co-design program. And I can assure you, I definitely wouldn't be here, aside from being invited, if I didn't work with such fabulous teams back in London who enable me to be here today. So I'm very grateful to them as well. And finally, I just want to acknowledge four groups here. First of all, the NIHR Biomedical Research Centre and the Imperial Health Charity, both of whom have supported aspects of my work, working with patients in partnership to improve care pathways. Also, RM Partners, the cancer system within which we work, who provided the original funding for the training to learn how to work in partnership using co-design methodology. And also my colleagues and friends at the Point of Care Foundation, who do amazing work to try and improve patient experience. So we've just been listening from you in this room. Every patient's an expert in their own chosen field and naming themselves in their own life. But there can sometimes be the flip side of patient involvement, which is that, are we truly involving patients, or is it really just a tick box exercise when we're looking to redesign services? Here are four books that I recommend to you, both to the healthcare professionals in the room as well as the patients and caregivers in the room. These are all books that are really harnessing compassion and how we work together and how compassionate care can make a real difference. And of course, here at Stanford understand the importance of having a very person-centered approach to cancer care. Part of my research in preparation for this talk was looking at the fabulous new hospital setup and the fact that there are actually wellness areas, not only for patients, but also for the caregivers, which is so important. And I've titled this talk, Building a Better Future Together, Patients and Caregivers as Partners and Leaders, because everyone has something to bring to the table to improve the care experience. And I know with the Stanford approach, the circles of care, for example, really taking a super person-centered approach to how care is delivered here. And it's such an impressive website. And as I say, it's such a great honor to be here on campus at Stanford today. Now, this may resonate with you. Focusing properly on what matters to patients can only be done if patients are part of the decision that are being made. And quite often, and I think previously, we have to bear in mind that when services, healthcare services, I'm sure in the US, but certainly in the UK, have been set up, it's been very driven by a system. We're going to build a hospital, we're going to deliver this service, but how person-centered is that? And that's why the questions asked in this patient partnership literature, are we serving the system or are we serving the person who has to use healthcare services? And also, some of you may well, in your time having care, come across surveys. You know, did you like your care today? Did you have a good experience? But what the co-design literature would say is, it's not just about surveys, it's about narratives. And Don Berwick from Harvard always said we need less spreadsheets and more fireside chats if we're going to improve healthcare. And as I've just heard today about the insurance in the American healthcare system as well, and you know how it can be difficult to access. So I'm very lucky to work within the National Health Service. But sometimes, and one of the books that I've just mentioned there, they say that, you know, while there is an industrialization of medicine happening, and it's happening, you know, worldwide, we have to remember our human business, that we're there to care. We're there to support people as healthcare professionals. And we can't lose sight of that. We can't let that, what they call the industrialization of medicine, overtake why we're there. And that's to care for each other and get people through treatment. So that, as I've heard today with the stories that you've got. And that, I just put that there, that's at Heathrow Airport. And I always like to give positive feedback to the security there. So I press the green button. And as I mentioned to the team yesterday, I was then followed through by a load of school children on their way to a skiing holiday who will hit the red button. So I don't know quite what security at Heathrow Airport is going to learn from that in terms of feedback. But on to a serious note now, and we all know that healthcare professionals don't always get it right. And we also know that when they don't get it right, things can go badly wrong. And about 10 years ago, there was this dreadful case at Mid Staffordshire NHS Foundation Trust, where ultimately there was a report written by a very senior judge in the UK that said that the healthcare system had got far too embroiled in trying to meet government targets and had lost its way in actually why it was there. Staff were speaking up because they were worried about where healthcare was going at the hospitals, and they were either ignored or bullied. And also, what happens is staff start feeling that they're not being listened to, and they start seeing bad practice. That bad practice suddenly starts becoming the norm. And sadly, there were numerous deaths that occurred as a result of this, and there was a big inquiry called the Francis Inquiry. But what came out of that is moving away from it just being healthcare professionals and managers reviewing hospital care, that a specialist team of hospital inspectors should be created to include patients and to identify problems early, so start listening to the people who use the services, and that patient groups should be properly funded and trained to carry out inspections, and also, if they wanted to bring in external experts. And we actually have a group called the Swallows Group in the United Kingdom, which is its Chief Executive Officer, Chris Curtis. He actually goes and visits hospitals and looks at how doctors are communicating with head and neck cancer patients to see, what's the quality of that communication. And he goes and gives feedback, which I think is great because, sometimes in busy clinics, people can, again, be under a lot of pressure. And I think it's great to have that level of peer review to look at, could we be doing things better? And David Gilbert, I'm going to mention him 2 or 3 times. He's someone who uses healthcare services and has done an incredible amount of work to develop healthcare leadership in the UK. And you sitting here today, just listening to you, patients, friends, caregivers, are you not our greatest resource when we're thinking about how we could change healthcare to make things better? Because, sometimes people have excellent clinical care, but the experience hasn't been great, and that's what we need to look at. And one question, again, which comes from IHI at Harvard, and I wonder if some of you were asked this question as you went through your own treatment experiences, is what matters to you? And that's a question that we should all be asking people who come for care. What matters to you? What are your priorities? Moving away from this is the treatment. I say, okay, this may be the treatment, but what matters to you at the moment? And you can get some really, really interesting answers that are so valuable in helping to personalise the care that you provide to people, particularly ourselves as speech language pathologists, working with people not only before treatment and during treatment, but also sometimes for many years after treatment. This book's really nice. This is a book that was edited by David Gilbert, written by David Gilbert rather, and contains people telling their stories of healthcare and how, based on their experience, they believe they could improve things. And I always say to people, patients were people before they were patients. And you all have amazing experiences, life experiences, in different walks of life that could really contribute to how healthcare is delivered. So we do need to have a shift in that power balance. We do need to start working in partnership, and we are working in partnership. I'm going to share one story with you towards the end of this about how we have done that. And it's not only about how we design services. We go right back to the beginning. Yeah, I'm sure that patients were engaged here at Stanford on what does good look like? What's good going to look like for people who come after you? Also about how the service is delivered. What does that feel like? How's it going to? How could we make it better? How could your experience be better? David Gilbert's talked about the patient leadership triangle, and actually he drew this up, and this is on a report that's available online. I'll have provided the reference in here. He's actually got a sort of a parallel patient board that works in partnership with the hospital. So they have a patient director to make sure, as he says here, we hardwire patient-centred cultures, systems and processes. There's a patient carer forum that feeds back into the hospital system. They're part, or into the healthcare system. They're part of that fabric. And having patient partners who are equal partners with the healthcare organisation to again make sure that that service is really person-centred and building for the future for people. And I'd encourage you to look at this report. It's really incredible, the work that he's done. And as I say, he's dedicated his life really to patient leadership. But also what he's done is he's a patient director here at this trust. He's on equal footing with those healthcare staff. So he can really affect change. And if we work in partnership and we learn from you and the walks of life that you've been through, we might be able to challenge the status quo. We might be able to change the way that we always do things, because there's always, well, this is the way we always do it. But what could we learn from the people who use services? Because quite often as well, what's been found is you can get a higher quality service and it might actually be economically more viable than what you're providing, because you're actually providing what people want. So if we co-design, work collaboratively as leaders. So when I work with people now, I work with patient leaders. I see it as a partnership. And you can also get, and there's one thing that comes out in all of these, if you look at the literature, is you could get positive and sustainable change if you involve the people who use the services and develop services with them. And as you'll know, Stanford is very research active, being a comprehensive cancer centre. And in the UK as well, we're really now engaging with patients. Not only engaging with patients, we've got patient partners working on research projects with us getting people involved. You will not get funding in the UK if there haven't been patients involved in developing research protocols, etc. And so now we're looking at co-producing research protocols. I've had the privilege of presenting at academic meetings with patients. We've now got patients who are leading national meetings, their own national meetings, and are inviting the speakers that they want from the healthcare world. And they've got people like yourselves sharing their stories and helping each other through learning through each other's experiences. And so you then get a shift in focus to what really matters to patients. It comes back to what matters to you, and that should be the same thing in research. And just to show you, there's actually now some work that's been going on looking at to what extent patients are involved. So are you involved? Has there been evidence of collaboration within research studies? Have they led or supported particular pieces of work within research studies? So this is the type of thing that people will be measured against increasingly as we get involved in research. Are we doing research that is relevant, that is going to help and support you in your lives? And from some very early work that I did at Imperial when I first got there, we were able to talk to patients. We sat down at equal group, a group of patients and a group of healthcare professionals together to find out what mattered to them and just share our experiences delivering care and then to share their experiences of receiving care. And as a result of those conversations, that helped to stimulate discussions that led to research protocols, to funding for research, to do really person-centered research, and in partnership with our patient experts, the people who live with their illness or their condition every day. And who better to ask and to guide us? And at the Royal Marsden, I'm one of the survivorship theme leads working at the International Centre for Recurrent Head and Neck Cancer. And while I have provided leadership on this, I provide that leadership in partnership with a patient expert. So we co-chair the group. And the role of that group, which is, continues to evolve, is to advise on developing existing research trials, developing trials and existing trials, making sure that research priorities are patient generated, make sure that when we write funding applications, that you, the patient experts, help to write them with us. And most organisations now, in fact, everyone I come across when I'm applying for research funding, they are all looking for evidence that you have got, not just did you speak to a patient, did they review an information sheet, did they actively take part in writing that protocol with you? Have you really properly engaged with people to better understand what matters to them? And recognising the contributions. We now are working, our patient experts are co-authors on papers as well, really important. And a few years ago, Heather and I contributed to this paper led by Camilla Dawson just about advocacy in head and neck cancer. And as we've been hearing from you today, there are unique challenges with cancer survivorship. Everyone's experiencing their own thing that matters to them. Some people it matters more to others, but it might be something else that matters to you more than someone else. And you've got advocacy groups coming together. Those advocacy groups, and I was looking at the Head and Neck Cancer Alliance website yesterday, lots of information there on awareness raising, information films to go with it. Education being provided by, as I say, patient expert groups now. And again, not only doing the recommendations for research priorities, but recommendations for cancer care coming out of all of this in terms of their experience. So important to listen to people. And this is just a handful of groups that I'm aware of, both in the US and Australia and the UK, either dealing directly with head and neck cancer or the consequences of head and neck cancer. And these groups are so important, and what I have found as well, so supportive. They really want to help and get involved. So for the clinicians in the room, do get in touch with these groups to make sure they can support you, to help you shape your applications. And as you said, it's wonderful the work that you're doing to raise awareness. And for example, the Head and Neck Cancer Alliance, the Swallows Group in particular, who I work with in the UK, Throat Cancer Foundation. All of these groups are doing amazing work. There is something we just need to consider though as well, because as I said, we heard from people today, and as the previous speaker said, there are some people who probably were reflecting and thinking, but didn't necessarily come forward and say how they were feeling today. And it's really important that when groups are set up, studies have looked at the dynamics within those groups, and it's really important, and we're very aware that when we're engaging with people, we're engaging with great people, but we also always think, who are we not engaging? Who are the voices that we're not, where are the voices that we're not hearing? How can we get those people involved? And just making sure that when patient and professional partnerships are set up, that there is a distribution of power and support for people within those groups as well, and making sure that everyone has a voice. And I always say to people, if you don't feel comfortable, don't feel comfortable contributing now, make sure you send me an email afterwards. Let me know how you're feeling afterwards, what you're contributing. Because some people are like that. Some people are reflectors. I like to absorb what they've heard at a meeting and then come back and share. And as I say, with access issues, and particularly with the project I'm going to tell you about shortly, during COVID, there are groups of people we just could not reach out to help us to shape things. And so really, it's great to have the voices in the room, but we should always be thinking, where are the other voices? How can we engage with people from different backgrounds? So the Point of Care Foundation, and Heather and I were listening to you talking in the previous conversation. As I said, we had a lovely afternoon yesterday talking about how we can improve care pathways, and some of the ideas that we were just getting from listening to you about your experiences and how healthcare feels. Experience-based co-design is a way of working in partnership to deliver on projects and deliver on better pathways. And it's this continuum. We need to move from a sense of just reacting to people's complaints, and sometimes our experience of getting a complaint from a patient results in a knee-jerk reaction, or we need to change this, we need to change this. But that's going to only improve things possibly for that person. How do we make sure that we improve things for everyone and go through a constant cycle of improvement where we move all the way through from just asking people to review information, etc., and get to where we're really truly working in partnership? And there have been several studies in the UK now where this methodology has been used. It was actually first used in head and neck cancer, but there are lots co-designing cancer care interventions, lung cancer services, breast cancer services. All have been looking to co-design these pathways. How can we make things better? And the great thing is, it's not just about making it better for patients, it also makes it better for the healthcare professionals, because one thing I do know through this work is that healthcare professionals love working with people and having that time to work and learn with patient experts. You get a range of people to make a creative contribution. It's equal collaboration. And as I was saying to Heather and the team yesterday, what you in your mind as someone setting up this project think is where it's going to go. When you start talking to people and ask them what matters to you, how does that feel, it might change direction. So you have to go into this with a very open mind. And it's a constructive thing. I have to say, in the time that I've done these projects and worked on sort of co-design stuff, there hasn't been anyone who's been particularly angry or wanted to try and shake things up. Everyone understands the context of healthcare and the pressures that healthcare is under. Everyone genuinely wants to make an improvement and a contribution going forward. And as David Gilbert said, you get much richer insights when you talk to people. You get potential solutions faster. Your relationship changes, and one of the things that I've experienced as I've done this work is that people who've got concerns or are noticing things they just want to highlight feel a lot more comfortable coming and say, Justin, can I just mention to you I noticed this? Because we're partners. We still have that patient-clinician relationship, but they feel more comfortable sharing, when they have a concern. And we should all be open to that, to listening and hearing from people. You get better quality decisions. You could change practice, and what you can do is you can change this really quickly. You can get a really quick solution here, improve things. But how do we make sure, and it's lovely to see the relationship you've got with the clinicians here today, but you need an adaptive, inclusive and relaxed environment if you're going to do this work. You need to have a shared understanding of where this is going and what you're trying to achieve. Most importantly, you need to trust each other and have empathy for each other as well. And trust is the number one thing in leadership, it's the number one thing in compassion, and if you're doing this work, it's the number one thing. And also we need to make sure that we reach out and are culturally appropriate and reaching out to all groups from all backgrounds to get them involved. And as I said, in healthcare services, if you improve healthcare through co-design, you will get sustained changes. And we were chatting yesterday just about how many projects we've done in the past that are probably on a shelf somewhere or on a disk drive somewhere. It's the ones that we've worked on with patients and the ones that are sustainable. Because if you don't deliver, the patients will come back and say, what about that project we worked on? What's happening with that? So it's very motivating, keeps things going. But some of the criticisms, or not criticisms, but observations have been, it is resource intensive. There are organisational constraints, and how do you free up the time to do this sort of work? You can have people who are less committed than others as well. And you've got to have everyone on board for this. And invariably, just as you do in business, just like you do in work, just as you do on the construction site, I'm sure there will be conflicts and tensions sometimes. People will be there, have different opinions, and you have to work together to solve those as you would with any discussion. And one of the other things that people have said is that can be a bit of ambiguity, like, are you a healthcare professional or are we patients? How is our relationship now? And you just need to explore that, and that will all come to the fore when you get there with doing this work. So, just for the last few minutes, I'm just going to tell you about a project that we did. I just want to also mention Grania Brady, who I've worked with on all these projects, and she's been absolutely fantastic driving them. She's my colleague at the Royal Marsden. And we did two projects. One where we looked at improving the experience of going through radiotherapy from a speech therapy perspective. And the other was looking at, as I'm sure, how many of you had telehealth or virtual consultations during the pandemic? Yeah, and that was kind of thrust upon you. It was like overnight, that was the end of that, and no more face-to-face consultations. It's all going to be online for now for a while until everything sorts out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a story about how we addressed that. So as I said, people may be satisfied with the care, but experience is different and how they experience care. And what we do with experience-based co-design is we use experience to gain insights and to identify opportunities to improve services. And rather than it being about opinions and attitudes, it's about experiences and how things feel, the aesthetics of care. So what you do, you kind of want to get around about 12 people, 12 healthcare professionals, 12 patient experts, ideally in a group. We've used varying numbers in our projects. But the first thing to say, and as I said to Heather and the team yesterday, is you might think it might be the attending you want to have there, it might be the speech pathologist you want to have there. But when you were recovering from surgery, who were the people who came and spoke to you every day? The nurses, yeah. Sometimes, one of the things that's come across is sometimes the people who bring the meals. They're the familiar faces who come and see you every day. They don't change. If you're off exercising, walking around the ward, it might be the administrator on the desk who really know what from a staff experience, what it's like. They might have really important observations. So it's not just about doctors coming. You interview staff. So I also said to the team yesterday, you want to have an idea of what you want to do. And I asked, how many of you have sat in the waiting room where your patients sit and experienced what it feels like to be in that space? And that's the start. Then you interview staff to find what their experiences of the particular service are. And then you you video film patients and talk to them about what their experiences have been of the care that they've received on that pathway. And then you make a 30-minute trigger film and then bring all the staff and all the patients together for the first time, and they watch the trigger film and they use that as a platform on which to then decide on what the priorities are for healthcare improvement. Then you make the changes, and then you celebrate, and there's a celebration event, and then you renew, and then things that you didn't address, you might want to then look at them and start looking at changing those. And it's an ongoing process. So the keys to success are knowing what it is that you want to do, so making sure that you shadow people, shadow patients, sit in, as I say, walk in people's shoes a bit. You must also, we have to have staff on board, because if the staff, they're a really critical part, because it has to work for the staff as well as the patients, because it's a partnership. And making sure that you engage patients, and certainly my experience is it's really important to keep things moving. Once you invite people to get involved, you've got to keep things moving. So I'll just tell you about what happened, and a number of you put your hand up to say that you were moved to telehealth quite rapidly during the pandemic. So overnight, as you'll know, but certainly in the UK, we were put into lockdown, and that was it. And the immediate priority for healthcare services was to stop footfall. So people would come for their radiotherapy and leave the hospital and have minimal contact with people. We became a head and neck cancer surgery hub, so people from across our area of London would all come just to have surgery at the Marsden. And we moved from people who we would see every week during their radiotherapy to online video calls, etc. And we had to implement this overnight. And I think we all learned together, didn't we? Because I hadn't used Teams before. People were familiar using Zoom. People started throwing out apps really quickly to say, oh yeah, look, you could use this mode or this way of talking to people. This was all overnight. And I don't know how you felt, did you feel prepared for this? I'll let you into a little secret. I don't think any of the healthcare professionals felt ready for this either, as we were all trying to work out how to work with this. So we went through this process of co-design, and in the interest of time, I can't go into the depths of it today, but just to give you an idea, we went through that process. After the first wave of the pandemic, we thought, what can we do to improve how we do this? Because we just basically put this on patients overnight, that this was the way we're going to do it. But also the staff had an opinion about how it had been almost thrust upon them. So we interviewed staff, we interviewed patients, we created a trigger film, we looked at emotional touch points, these points to see what worked well, how did that make people feel at all the different points of implementation. And then we broke into co-design teams. So patients and staff work together to work on specific pieces of work that I'll tell you about. Some of the positives that came out when we spoke to people was it was cost effective. Previously, people had to come across London, pay for transport to come in and have voice therapy or swallowing therapy, and all of a sudden they were on their iPhone at home or at work for people who were at work. It was more time efficient as well. People weren't having to take time off work to come and have appointments. It was more flexible. We had really strict clinics before, and it was like, well, can we fit you in here? Can we fit you in there? And it was all online. It was just about adjusting the time on the online meeting. And people felt it was much more person-centered, perhaps, than what we'd been doing before. But some of the things that people were concerned about was how important face-to-face was. And I don't know if that resonates with you. That sense of you've been going for appointments with your doctors, they've been feeling your neck, they've been looking in your mouth, doing all these things, and then all of a sudden, you're at the end of a camera. Was that something that you experienced? And that is the thing, it went from that And one of our patient participants said, "Are you getting the full story?" And he didn't only reflect on his own experience. He said, "How is it for you? How is it for you as a doctor, not being able to touch and feel and look?" We talked about safety because we did, while there were mostly head and neck cancer patients in this group, we also had people having physiotherapy for other cancers. In the gym at the hospital, we knew people were safe. But what about people who were having to do exercise at home, maybe on their own, if they fell? Those sorts of concerns. Also, we assumed that everyone would know how to use their iPad or their iPhone to just get on with this wonderful relationship we were going to all have with this new therapeutic relationship. And the reality is, and we know from research that's been done in Australia in particular, actually the people who you would think probably would struggle more, i.e. older people, actually do all right. And also the thing that kind of shocked us a little bit, but you make that assumption, is how many people didn't have a smartphone and just had a regular phone with no screen. So there are all these issues. And as I said, the really important thing whenever you're doing this work is, what about the people we didn't talk to? What about the people who didn't come forward for these projects? What about the people who didn't experience? Because all the people we involved had experience of having telehealth. And as I'm sure, I know Heather and the team mentioned this, there were people who just went off grid during COVID, during the pandemic, who we didn't see. So as I say, the kind of feedback we got from patients was, I don't know why we haven't done this before. People were travelling miles to come in for daily therapy. If they were having swallow boot camp therapy. Yeah, I did some of it in my lunch break while I was working from home, and then finished off the last 3 or 4 sessions while I was on holiday. It was great. As long as you got Wi-Fi, you were sorted. One patient, as I said, saying, "Are you getting the full story? Is this satisfying for you as a healthcare professional?" And the other thing, which I think is really nice, and also something hopefully I think will be able to take away from today, and I said we had a great discussion yesterday in the department about making a contribution to the future. And if there are experiences that you've had and there are issues with pathways that you might want to explore, potentially with Heather and her team or other people, you could be making a really big and important difference for people who come later on for treatment. But the patients were very clear on one thing, and one thing we did know is that healthcare generally thought, well, this is brilliant. Look at the number of people we can treat if we do this all online. But the patients were very clear. We need to be patient first, not digital first. We need to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the right people. So some of the work streams that we looked at or are looking at still, audits on digital exclusion. So who can't use telehealth? Who hasn't got access to stuff? From a safety point of view, developing a standard operating procedure to make sure that we're doing the right thing, that there's actually because we did all this with no guidance. Overnight this was created. So that was another thing. And in each of these groups there are patients and healthcare professionals working in partnership. Looking at quality assurance, and then within communication, informational communication preferences. And we've just moved over to a new electronic medical record system. And the lovely thing about doing this work was there is now a box there just after it's, your marital status, your religion. Are you open to having telehealth consultations? So that we're making sure that if there are people who don't want to, that they're not being hassled to have telehealth consultations. And finally, and this is coming from our patient experts, they said, well, why don't we look at some sort of peer support system for people who aren't as good at using iPads or other tablets are available. And just to sort of close, this was actually, we published the work, but also it got picked up by the British Medical Journal. And I'm really pleased to see that they did a section on about using our experience as a model for the future. And one of our patient experts actually was the co-author on this paper in the British Medical Journal. I certainly didn't think I'd ever publish anything in the British Medical Journal. I don't think she did either, but we did. And just in the paragraph there that I'll just read to you, I was later approached and asked if I'd be willing to work collaboratively with staff in a co-designed project to share my experience of using telemedicine in rehabilitation in order to improve future services. I initially thought it would be staff leading the changes and seeking patient opinions about their ideas, but I found I was not just a source of information. The project was a true partnership with patients often leading suggestions for improvement and staff working with us to make them possible. I've enjoyed being part of the project, and it gives me a sense of satisfaction to think that through the co-design group, I may have been able to make a contribution to helping future patients. And an unexpected bonus has been that after watching myself back on video and talking in online meetings, I've overcome many of my anxieties about how clearly I can be understood following my surgery, as my speech is much better than I imagined it was. And going forward, I feel there should be the option for some remote consultations to save travel time. The development of the hybrid approach by the therapies department is ideal, where patients can still access face-to-face appointments when required or preferred by the patient. So this was lovely to be able to get the patient's opinion, not only the hospital management and the clinician's opinion about what a positive experience had been to work together. And just finally, I've also gone on to work with, in my non-cancer work, I work with people who have head and neck conditions that are non-cancer related as well, developing tools in partnership with patients and in partnership with clinicians to make sure that we can move towards patient-led consultations. I've done this work, and for those of you who are interested in the partnership that we're doing, there's the Humans of Health Research webpage at Imperial College London, and you'll see all the projects there that patients and healthcare professionals have worked together on to hopefully make things better for people in the future. So just to close, patients should be integral to service development. Yeah, and just hearing your experiences today, they are so valuable and certainly make me as a professional reflect when I hear your stories. We should be making sure that we ask what matters to you and make sure that works in the research world as well. And one of the things that I've loved and why I'm so privileged to be here today is that we learn together and learn from each other. Many of the frustrations can be shared. You know, you might be a bit fed up with some aspects of healthcare, but sometimes you'll find that your doctors and therapists are also a bit fed up. And sometimes it's just good to talk about that and to understand it. And my experience has been you can make some really big and important changes with very little resource or money. And what I would hope going forward, and hopefully, you know, I've given you some idea on this today as well, is just to think about moving from being a patient or a caregiver to moving and being a participant and a future leader in healthcare as well. So thank you for your time. Thank you again to Heather and the team for inviting me. And I look forward to hearing any work that you work together on going forward and in the future. So thank you.